now what we want to do is build out our template before we start adding anything to our artboard here. So essentially, I'm going to go back out into gallery because I have an example that I want to show you first. Essentially, when we're doing a straight repeat, the setup is basically like this. Whatever is going to be at the top of your square has to match in the exact same place at the bottom. Whatever is on the left side of your square has to match in the exact same place on the right hand side. This is basically how we build that repeating seamless tile. You have to be careful with these because they can be a little bit easier to kind of see where that repeat starts and ends. There are some other options that you could utilize, but for this class we're just going to keep it with the basic straight repeat. But there's also the half drop repeat, which is a little bit more complicated. We're basically dropping our repeat down by a half. So in this case, your seams are going to match up at the top and bottom, just like in that straight repeat. Whatever's at the top has to be in the exact same place at the bottom. But whatever is in your lower left quadrant of your square will match up with whatever is in your upper right quadrant. So basically you're dropping your tile by half of its actual measurements. These are a little bit better in terms of not being able to see that repeat seam a little bit easier. But just for the sake of ease for this class, since we're kind of dealing with complicated motifs, I wanted to just keep us within the straight repeat pattern. But if you're interested in something like that, I do have some other classes that I will share in the description box of the class that show you how to work with half drop patterns as well as like rectangular patterns instead of square shapes as well. And then I also have some on YouTube as well. So this little sample here is from one of my YouTube videos where I kind of walk through that process. But for now, we're going to stick with this straight repeat just to kind of make it a little bit easier as we're working with setting up this reusable template. So I'm going to go back out into gallery, and then I'm going to select my new artboard. I'm actually going to rename this Arts and Crafts 1. And you could also name it like a template if you'd like, so that you know you can reuse this template over and over. Once I'm done renaming, I can just tap on the blank icon and it'll bring me to my artboard. So what we're going to do is set up a template that allows us to create the seamless repeat really easily. And it also saves us in terms of layers. So to begin this process, what we're going to do is go into our color wheel and update the color to something that's easy to see. And we're going to start to build out our quadrants using the save and load function. So it's basically like an action that is already saved and loaded into the system that we can reuse over and over again. We're going to basically draw or pull our elements or motifs in the center of our artboard here. And then using these save and load actions, we're then going to be able to transform them so that they go out into the corners and the edges, and then we fill in the center. Kind of similar to the affine function that you might see in something like Affinity Photo or Photoshop, but we're doing it manually. So once we've updated our color wheel, we're going to drag and drop it into our artboard here. And then what we want to do is go into our transform tool here, our little arrow tool. And before we do anything, we're going to turn on snapping, and we want to make sure magnetics and snapping is turned on. Distance, velocity are both at max. And then we can tap out of that. I'm going to make this a little smaller so you can see what I'm doing. And for this first quadrant, we're going to take our corner, pull it in so that it's basically in 1/4 of our square here. So it'll be 2000 by 2000 pixels. Once we're done with that, we're going to go back into our layers here, select the layer, select the icon in that first layer that we've just transformed, and you'll get this pop up. And what we'll want to do is click on select, and then we're going to go to this bottom pop up and you'll see a heart icon, and that says save and load. So we're going to save and load it by tapping on it and then hitting this plus icon in our selections, and this is going to be selection 1. And then we can just tap on our selection icon here to deselect everything. I have a layer in here to kind of show you how this is going to work. It's not exact, but basically our square tiles basically cut in half lengthwise and then widthwise, and you'll see 4 quadrants. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what we want to do basically is create a transformation for each of these 4 quadrants. And then we'll be able to kind of move forward and build out the repeat from there. So once we've added our first selection, you can just go into that layer. For you, it'll be layer 1. For me, it's layer 2 because I have that little example showing how the tile is split in half. What you'll want to do is tap on your image icon here within that layer and then just select clear. Go back to our color picker, drag and drop color into our shape, select our transform tool, and then we're going to drag from the lower right hand corner up to our second quadrant. So we already did this first one, now we're doing the top one. And what's nice is with snapping and magnetics turned on, you'll get these crosshairs and you'll know you're in the exact place that you need to be when your width and height pops up and says 2000 by 2000 or whatever size parameters you may have been using in your file here. And also because you'll see a yellow crosshair and then you'll see these kind of like diagonal blue lines. Then you can release it, and then we're going to go into our layers again, select the little image icon with the color, tap on select. In this pop-up at the very bottom, select save and load, and then hit the plus so that this loads this to your next selection. That's going to be selection 2. Now you can tap on your selection icon to deselect, go into your layers, tap on the color icon, and then hit clear. Go back into your color picker here, drag and drop into your square, and then select your transform tool. And this time we're going to bring it from the lower left hand to the upper right hand, and we'll be in our third quadrant. You'll see the double crosshairs pop up, and you'll see the width is at 2000 by 2000, so you are in the exact quadrant that you need to be. Then you can just release your selection, and then we can go into our layers, tap on your color icon, and then tap on select, and then you'll get this pop-up. Hit save and load, select your plus icon, that'll be your third selection, and then tap on your selection icon in the upper left hand corner to deselect everything. Go into your layers, clear this out once more, and then drag and drop your color into your square again, and then this will be our final transformation. Select your transform tool, that little arrow, drag from the upper left hand corner down to the lower right hand corner, and this is going to be your fourth and final quadrant. Release it, and then go into your layers options, tap on that little icon there, click on select, you'll get your pop-up, tap on save and load, and then hit the plus icon and you'll get your fourth selection. Now you can go into this layer and delete it or clear it, whatever you want. So before we pull in any of our new elements, I want to quickly show you how this works. Basically, we're going to be creating our artwork in the center of this tile without it touching or going over any of the edges. This is really important. So I'm just going to create a simple polka dot for now. And then I'm going to fill it. And what we'll do is work through those transformations that we just created. So with that new layer selected that I just filled, I'm going to turn on this little example icon so you can kind of see we have the 4 quadrants, and basically what we're going to do is take these elements and transform them so that they go out to the edges, and then we fill the center. So I'm going to go into my layers. I'm going to add a new layer because this is a very important part of this. We have to have a layer of color underneath our motif elements. So in this case, I added a new layer, and I'm just going to drag and drop color into that layer. And I'm going to group these layers, so the background color here, and then I'm going to drag right over the polka dot layer, and I'm going to select group, and then I'm just going to rename this pattern test. Now with that grouped layer selected in blue, what we'll do is tap on our selection icon in the upper left hand corner, and then you'll get this pop up and you'll see that save and load icon option again. We're going to tap on save and load, and then what we're going to do is select that first selection, and then we're going to tap on our transform tool, which is the arrow, and then you'll see that first selection is selected, and then you'll want to flip horizontally and then flip vertically. And what this does is bring everything to our edges. Now we're going to repeat this process again. So making sure that layer group is still selected, tap on your selection icon, you'll get this pop-up, tap on save and load, and then we'll tap on selection 2, then tap on your transform tool, and then select flip horizontal, flip vertical. And then we'll repeat this process for the next 2. Tap on your selection tool, tap on save and load, hit selection 3, tap on your transform tool, flip horizontal, flip vertical. And then tap on your selection tool to deselect, and then tap on that selection tool once more, tap on save and load, hit selection 4, tap on your transform tool, and then flip horizontal, flip vertical. And what it's done is basically brought everything to our edges, creating our seamless pattern, and then what we'll want to do is fill out the center. So I'll go back in, making sure I'm on my layer where I drew the polka dot. You could also make copies of the original, so you always have that original that you can copy and paste, and that's what we'll do when we're building the more complex elements. But just for the sake of being able to show the example, I'm just gonna edit as is. So once I've done that, I'm gonna go onto the layer that had the polka dots, and then I'm just gonna fill in my center. And now we've created essentially a seamless pattern. So what we could do now is test this. So I'm gonna minimize this layer group. I'm gonna duplicate it by swiping left and selecting duplicate. I'm gonna take this first one, turn it off by tapping on that little check mark box, and it'll turn off the layer group so you can no longer see it. And then this new duplicated version of the layer group, I'm gonna merge it so that it's just one flat file. So I'm gonna tap on the little image icon, select flatten, and then I'm gonna make 3 more copies of this, so we have 4 total. So I'm just gonna drag left and then hit duplicate and do this until I have 4 total pieces. And now we're gonna kind of piece it together like a puzzle. So we'll take that first layer, the second layer, and the third layer. We're just gonna turn them all off, and then we're gonna pick our 4th layer. And then I'm gonna tap on the transform tool, that little arrow, and then I'm gonna drag this down into my first quadrant, and then go back into my layers, turn on the next one, and then drag it into my next quadrant, and then repeat this process for the next 2 layers. Go into the next layer, turn it on, tap on the transform arrow, drag it up to my 3rd quadrant, and then go into my final layer, turn it on, select my transform tool so I can resize it, and then drag it down to my 4th quadrant. And we've created a repeating seamless pattern that we can reuse over and over again. And what's nice is that typically when you're creating these transformations, you have to create a whole new layer. But because we're able to utilize those save and load actions, we can basically make those transformations really easily without having to add additional layers. So this is kind of how the process works. Now what we'll want to do is build on top of this. So we've already saved and loaded all of our actions. We can select all of these layers and just delete them. And we can now begin to pull in our motif elements. So we have our file set up, we have our actions created. Now it's time to bring those sketches in and start to finalize them and build out our repeat.